President Obama had a meeting yesterday where he convened black, well, call them black activists, community leaders, police, various other people in order to try to, I guess, have a discussion regarding the issue that the black community has with the police community. One, this should have gone down a long time ago because Obama apparently was aware of the issues between the black community, but only because that it's flared up to such a level, and the 5 police officers that were killed in Dallas basically brought this thing to a head. Okay, not the 2 gentlemen that got killed by the police prior to that assassination of the cops in Dallas, but because this has radicalized people on both sides. It's radicalized the police, where they feel they're under attack, they're not respected by the black community, and it's radicalized black people because we know we've been under attack by certain, not all, but certain police officers and police departments, but more so under attack by the justice system, okay, that allows policing to be practiced in such an unfair manner. Now, I'm going to play this clip, and you're going to get, I believe, a sense of what went down in the meeting.
We're not at a point yet where communities of color feel confident that their police departments are serving them with dignity and respect and equality, and we're not at the point yet where police departments feel adequately supported at all levels.
President Barack Obama speaking out on policing in our communities after weeks of unrest and protests following the police shootings of 2 black men, one in Baton Rouge and one in Minnesota. Yesterday at the White House, he convened a meeting of civil rights, faith, law enforcement, and elected leaders from across the country. They met more than 4 hours. The president brought the group together to have a conversation about ways to keep folks safe, also how to build community trust and ensure justice for all Americans. We want to hear what took place in that meeting. Let's go right to several people who were in the meeting. Judith Brown Diane is a civil rights attorney, executive director of the Advancement Project, co-director of the Advancement Project. On the phone, executive director for Color of Change, Rashad Robinson. Also on the phone, Sherilyn Ifill, president and director counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Joining us on the panel today, Amber J. Phillips, co-director of Black, Rap Chittum's senior vice chair, D.C. Republican Party. Judith, I'll start with you. A long meeting. How productive was it yesterday with the president?
Well, it was a constructive conversation. You have to understand the people in the room also included law enforcement from many cities, mayors, the governor of Louisiana. So it was a real mix of folks. And I think that we were struggling with making sure that folks could see both sides, and for the black folks who were in the room to make sure that law enforcement and elected officials understood how personal this was and how our community is suffering and in pain, but also frustrated and angry. And so I think it was constructive. I also think that the president is really struggling with wanting to make a difference, but also knowing that he only has 6 months left. And so I think it was the beginning of a conversation. He was trying to build on the task force that he had before, but it surely, you know, I wouldn't say we walked out of there and it was a kumbaya moment and everything is fixed. We walked out of there knowing that there were certain things that we had to look at, which include data, which include accountability and consequences for police officers. We talked about the unions, the police unions, where we need real change. So there's more to do.
Sherilyn, as I listened to Judith describe that, and look, I've interviewed Judith many times and know her quite well. When she was not hedging, but clearly that was some unease. Yes, I heard to Judith. That was some unease there, Sherilyn, in terms of the other folks who were in the room. At some point, Did it get as raw as a discussion as needed so folks can understand how major this issue is as it relates to the community aspect?
Well, good morning. Good morning, Roland. You know, the truth is this last week has been so raw that the context in some ways was sufficient to really set the table for, how we all came into that room. The president asked us to be honest and blunt, also asked us to be respectful, and everyone honored that. So I thought the discussion was good in that I thought people laid it out there in ways that were, were very powerful, but that were tremendously respectful. I think Judith's, understandable hesitation and skepticism is probably one we all share because, that's a moment where, it was longer than a moment, it was many hours. But the truth is, in what happens after you leave that room and you go back and you have to really, for the law enforcement people, in my view, take on leadership within your community. And I think we all talked about the need to hear their voices acknowledged. That was something Brian Stevenson, who was also in the room, talked about, the need for acknowledgement. And that came up many, many times, that we need to hear out of the mouth of police unions, we need to hear out of the mouth of police chiefs the reality that change has to happen, the reality that there is racial bias. We have to hear them take responsibility. If they claim that this is about bad apples, we need them to take responsibility for bad apples. So, the question is, outside that room, what happens? And I think the president, is aware of that as well. And it's something the American public has to understand, and especially African Americans. This is largely a problem that will play itself out locally. The federal government has some influence, and we all talked about using the leverage of the federal government. In particular, I was emphasizing the issue of funding, of grants that come from the federal government to local departments, and how those can be used to influence policy and make change. But the truth is, much like education, much of criminal justice and policing in particular has to be managed at the local level. And so I think we're all very aware that when we leave that room and when we leave the president's task force and when we leave the federal arena, that's where the rubber meets the road. And for those of us who've been doing work in Baton Rouge, for example, it's a very, very bumpy road down there, and it's about local police and local leadership. And we need voices on the ground in law enforcement who are going to speak to that.
Judith, the thing that I think you said something I find to be interesting right there when you said that the president realizes how much time he has. But the reality is this here. We have been facing these issues for quite some time. Do you believe that the president, when it came to that committee he put together, was late to this? Because this is his 8th year.
Right.
We've seen this, and so he could have pulled this together far earlier in his presidency.
Right. Sure. I mean, I would say that yes, this was a little late. This is one of those issues, like you said. At least from 1991 with the Rodney King incident, when it was caught on video, right? That was a moment that opened it and exposed it to America, the thing that we knew about what was happening in our community for centuries. And so going into the presidency, clearly that should have been one of the top agenda items, but really didn't kind of start to catch any force until much later in the presidency. But I do think that, by the appointments that he made at the Department of Justice, he clearly showed, putting Vanita Gupta in place at Civil Rights, that she's somebody who's coming in with an eye towards criminal justice. We have so much work to do, and I think that this White House has done some. Yes, it hasn't done enough. We have a lot to do in our communities, as Charlene explained, but I will tell you that being in that room, I think it was important, but realize that a lot of the people in that room were also people at least from law enforcement and from cities, we're already doing kind of what we call promising practices.
Right.
But it's those people who are outside the room, who are the rogue departments, who are beating down people, who are jumping out on people who weren't in the room that need to be in the conversation. And what that's going to take is a long-term organizing campaign in our communities to hold these folks accountable. And we know that we are marching in the streets, and the marching in the streets is important, and it is being turned into power, and we're changing the conversation. That's the other thing.
But you know,
We're changing it.
Sherilyn, when the president was discussing health care, that was 2009. They had it open to the public. I understand creating a space for folks to be able to be honest. But this is one of those meetings that should be open to the public. This is a meeting where the camera should be there.
Right.
And it should be aired on C-SPAN. And then other folks should have the opportunity to be able to air it, because I just believe, and again, some folks might play to the cameras, I understand that, but I believe by having a open conversation, you also are able to invite folks in and then be able to have the information go forth. Your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's an interesting idea, Roland. Actually, I think the conversation in some ways would be an excellent conversation to be open, because what I do think that Americans needed, communities around this country, is modeling how to have these incredibly difficult conversations, across constituency and across interest and across race. And, one of the things that was talked about in the meeting was the idea of having local conversations like this. And I think one way to promote having local conversations like this is to show people what it can look like. Is to show people that they don't have to be afraid to come around the table. It's to show people what can be valuable about coming around the table. So I would have welcomed it being open. I think now seeing how it has gone and how it went, the president probably would welcome it being open too. I certainly think that he may have been unsure of how it was going to play out. And I think many people are hardwired to believe that if you do it publicly, people start grandstanding, and it's a different conversation than when the cameras are not there, that people are more likely to be constructive. So I can understand the inclination to think if it's a private conversation, it's likely to be more productive and constructive. But I also agree that we need to begin to publicly model what these conversations can and should look like, so that communities like Baltimore and Charleston and so forth can replicate similar conversations at the local level where the real solutions are going to happen.
And look, first of all, I have moderated any number of conversations that have lasted 2, 3, 4, 6 hours. I believe there's a way for you to drive this conversation with the people in the room where it can be public. Sure, I know the president is doing a town hall meeting tonight with ABC and ESPN and Disney networks, but I think the people who were in that room is going to be a lot different than the conversation that's going to be on ABC, and there's a way to do it. I want to go bring in Amber and bring in Ralph as well, because again, in order for us to change what is happening, there has to be, I believe, the honest conversations. But not just, again, people keep saying that we need to have a conversation. No, I need action.
Right.
I need examples of people who are doing the job, to the point that Judith made and Sherilyn made as well, challenging law enforcement to say, you at some point are going to have to speak vigorously against the no snitch policy in police departments. Law enforcement at some point, and we had law enforcement officers on a 2-hour special on TV1 on Tuesday who said cops are going to have to learn how to be empathetic with these shootings and even challenge these unions to stop being so hostile when cops are doing wrong things in the streets. Ralph first, then Amber.
Well, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, talk is cheap, but action is what's needed. But, you mentioned something that's very interesting, and people haven't touched on this. It's the police unions. You have the unions that are stepping up and protecting these officers when they do something wrong, when these officers honestly should be cut loose. I'm from New York originally, and I remember, Frank Serpico. These cops out here on the street, a lot of the good ones are afraid to speak up because they know that like when Serpico spoke up, his bad cops who were with him stepped back and let him get shot in the face. So, we need to take on the police unions, we need to take on the police brass, we need to take on this culture of circling the wagons regardless of what happens. And that's not just in the police department, that's a broader conversation, because we have teachers unions that protect teachers who sexually molest students. So, this is a broader conversation that's not just with the police. We have to deal with these institutions in this country that protect evil and bad people at the expense of us, the American populace, the taxpaying citizens.
I don't know about any union that protects a teacher that's a sexual predator. I think he got that wrong. Now, the unions do protect poor performing teachers. I'll go along with him there. But I have yet to see a union that will support a teacher that's a sexual predator. Yeah, you got that one wrong, Ralph.
So I think first off, to compare police unions with teacher unions is a completely different conversation. Additionally, we are at 3 years ago yesterday, we got the not guilty verdict around George Zimmerman's case. Since then, organizations like Black Lives Matter and BYP 100 not only responded, but they have created organizations that are actually doing the work on the ground. And the most we have gotten is a conversation to tell us that water is wet, that there is a problem in these police forces. I want to know, what are we doing to divest from police, to reinvest into our communities, so that we can ensure that this isn't happening anymore? If the issue is the police cannot have oversight on themselves, why are we still having conversations with them? When is the conversation going to happen around alternatives to police, community policing? Because I think that's where we are right now. After last week, these conversations are late and they're not doing enough.
Folks, hold tight 1 second. Donald Trump has decided he is not going to.
All right, so that's that basically covers Obama's meeting, and again, maybe not on day one of his first term, but damn sure on day one of his second term, because this is not a new phenomenon as far as the rancor between the black community and the police department, and the police doing dirt. As one of the panelists said, this has been going on for years, decades, centuries. So when Obama got in there, he knew full well what was going on. And when it flared up, and situations like when the police harassed a guy that they claim was breaking into his own house, that professor from Harvard, Obama steps up there, and he didn't go far enough. Now, again, when he did what he did and called police stupid, you know he was going to catch criticism from the right, but he had to get his haunches up on that one, and not in my language would have been kiss my ass, they were stupid, but to push back on them and just put them in their place. He never did that. He was always looking to be a calm hand. He was always looking for reconciliation. But sometimes you just cannot look for reconciliation. Sometimes you have to stick to your guns because the other side is so wrong, and they need to come to you in order to get something done. Because if you're consistently going in their direction, and they are unwilling to give anything, all you're going to do is you're going to foster resentment, and then anger, and then violence. And that's where we are right now.